The success of a country is determined by its foreign relations around the world. For years, Nigeria has worked to improve its image among other countries. When President Bola Tinubu was sworn in, he immediately began engaging with global communities to form partnerships with governments and international organizations. The goal is to concentrate on maintaining regional cooperation and stability. The Economic Community of West African States and the African Union became his top priorities.
Democracy is nothing more than the political framework and the path to addressing the basic needs and aspiration of the people. This is why we must re-examine our current approach to the quest for constitutional order.
He was faced with the problems posed by several coups in the ECOWAS region. Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso were sanctioned almost immediately. The decision met with strong condemnation. The countries were already struggling economically, and there were requests for the penalties to be repealed. The three nations announced their departure from the bloc. During the ECOWAS Heads of State Conference in Nigeria's capital, the ECOWAS president announced the lifting of some of the sanctions after extensive deliberation. Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso have been reluctant to rejoin ECOWAS, but in his role as chairperson of the bloc, Tinubu is working to unify the region.
In these very complex situations, when the president and the authorities of heads of state have used the carrot and stick method, and the whole issue of sanctions did not work, what other means it's left for the president and the chairman of ECOWAS is also, still continuing to dialogue with these people, with these countries who have left, and ECOWAS. And then there was, the president, if you listen to during the first extraordinary summit in January this year, the President Tinubu said that there was a time has come for ECOWAS to think of other ways fresh ways of doing things, fresh ways of, innovative ways of tackling the issue of terrorism and insecurity in the West African sub-region, fresh ways of, dialoguing with these countries who have exited the community. And so this is what has been happening. And, in terms of even fighting terrorism, there are lots of, ECOWAS has different protocols and programs in addressing terrorism. But President Tinubu has said that there is a need for a harmonization of some of these programs aimed at countering terrorism and insecurity in the West African sub-region. And then recently we've seen that the ECOWAS standby force, the heads of state of authorities have decided that this standby force should now focus on fighting terrorism. And we've seen, the heads of state of authorities of ECOWAS, led by President Tinubu, has approved that, the sum of about $2.5 billion be raised for this ECOWAS standby force on terrorism to make it effectively, to make it effective in fighting terrorism. And this funds for this force is to be raised among member countries. Some of it is going to be raised among member countries. And we know that ECOWAS ministers of finance are putting together the modalities to make this a reality. And then we expect that when this standby force begins and starts, it will go a long way, because this standby force will be now sent to countries that in the West African sub-region that are dealing with insecurity, just like how we had in the past, like ECOMOG, for those countries who were doing with wars. And so we now have this one specially, devoted to handling the issue of terrorism. And so we hope to see, this standby force come to effect sooner than later. He has done a lot. Let's even look at still in Africa, beyond even, those countries in crisis. We saw what happened in Sierra Leone, when the insurrection happened last year in Sierra Leone. And it began because Sierra Leone is a country many feel is like on a tinderbox that needs to be, handled very carefully, because this is a country that has come out of a civil war, and efforts are being made that it doesn't erupt again, crisis doesn't erupt again. And so when we saw that insurrection in Sierra Leone last year, in December last year, in 2023, President Tinubu sent a strong delegation of some of the service chiefs of this country with the president of ECOWAS Commission, Dr. Omar Toure to go to Sierra Leone, dialogue with the president, and try to resolve the problem. And so we saw that eventually. We saw former President Kuruma coming to Nigeria, on medical grounds, and that sort of like eased the tensions in Sierra Leone. So this is the way he has also, looked at, tried to address some of the problems and reached out to leaders in other countries for different reasons. We also saw what happened in Senegal, at the end of the day, the elections, the president didn't want to call elections. Eventually he did. And we know that obviously the President Tinubu reached out to, President Macky Sall, so that, we don't have crisis in this country. We've seen the president reach out to different governments. He has traveled, he has tried to not just improve diplomatic ties with these countries, but also to bring about economic partnerships with these countries. We've seen with the EU, we saw the German Chancellor come to Nigeria last year. He visited the president. The German Chancellor came to sign different agreements, worth, millions of euros covering different areas. The EU has signed different agreements with ECOWAS in areas of climate change, in areas of regional integration, clean energy, So these are the ways where President Tinubu has gone, around different countries, even to Saudi Arabia, to deepen, not only to deepen diplomatic relations, but also for economic integration, economic development of Nigeria in this sense and those countries.
According to some analysts, the region is more divided than it has ever been under President Tinubu.
We noticed some assaults, policy changes here and there that does not seem to, show any some coordination. I think coordination is lacking, and then communication is another thing. One has seen a situation where the president has gone out and those handling him put out statements that were later retracted or found to be untrue. This is not good for his image. And then the other thing is that you also have to show some. Nigeria ought to be asserting its position as authority, as a hegemon in West Africa at least. But the impression now is that the weakness that Nigeria has shown, the incapacity of leadership, has impacted negatively on ECOWAS, because without Nigeria, there is really no ECOWAS. And it's unfortunate that what is happening in ECOWAS, and people blame that partly, in fact, mainly on the fact that Nigeria is not functioning very well or has not shown leadership. So I think there is a deficit in that area. The president has to, particularly now that he is also having the position, the shadow of as a chairman of the authority of ECOWAS, he ought to show more from what leadership. And you have also seen situations where the last time it was reported that Nigerians didn't know where he was for a week or thereabout. That is not good for leadership. That is not good for his image. I think Nigeria under Tinubu should get his acts together and then show leadership so that others, not just Nigerians, West Africans and Africans, in fact, the black race, they are pinning their hope on Nigeria to, show leadership.
Economic diplomacy has been a key component of President Tinubu's foreign policy, with an emphasis on attracting foreign investment, expanding trade possibilities, and promoting Nigeria's economic interests overseas. For these reasons, President Tinubu has visited nations. His first stop was in France for a 2-day climate summit. He traveled from France to London for a brief period of privacy. Tinubu visited Guinea-Bissau in July last year for the 63rd ordinary session of the ECOWAS Authority of Heads of State and Government, where he was elected chairman. He went from Guinea-Bissau to Kenya on July 15 to attend the African Union's 5th Mid-Year Coordination Conference, then traveled to India in September of last year to participate in the G20 Leaders Summit. Before returning to Paris, he visited United Arab Emirates and the United States for the United Nations General Assembly. In October, the president traveled to Saudi Arabia, Guinea-Bissau, and Germany before heading to Dubai. Between May and December last year, he visited Nairobi, Kenya, Porto Novo, Benin Republic, and Berlin. The presidency had come under fire for funding around 1,114 delegates to the United Nations Annual Climate Summit COP28, which was held in Dubai at the end of last year. He was also criticized for traveling on an official trip with his sons. In response, the presidency stated that it only catered for 422 delegates and promised to reduce travel delegations by almost 60%. He did not, however, mention a reduction in the amount of his travels, instead underscoring that Nigeria is ready and open for business. President Tinubu's foreign policy initiatives have attracted investors from Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Germany, Mauritius, South Africa, Hong Kong, United States, and United Kingdom, amounting to billions of dollars.
Priority visas for students, because so many countries, the developed countries, give admission to students and then they don't issue the visas. Some even commit funds. So we've been pushing very hard on these countries, saying, look, if you know you're not going to issue them visas, then don't allow your universities to admit them and even allow them to commit funds, and then they don't get visas, and then they're sitting, they waste the whole year without going to school. So we're making progress on that. With all the activities going on, we've had about 300 engagements in and out of the country.
But problems still exist. Critics have voiced concerns about the need for greater consistency and clarity in Nigeria's diplomatic interactions. Others are now pushing for a more forceful approach in tackling poverty and to reduce the rate of Nigerians leaving the country.
I also think that what needs to happen as quickly as possible, again, is that at this point in time, our envoys are actually not seated where they are. The ambassadors have been recalled. There's also a need to have ambassadors out as well, because for you to drive foreign direct investments, if you also come and sign agreements and agree on certain agree on certain things that is documented in the form of MOUs and all manner of trade agreements and all of that, people have to also sit back and follow up on those agreements, and it's usually the responsibilities of ambassadors.
True.
I expect that ambassadors will be appointed and they would actually be out there doing the bidding of Mr. President and doing the things that Mr. President has itemized in his Renewed Hope agenda as far as foreign policy is concerned. Then domestically, we can also not, we can't ignore the challenges that Nigerians are facing. It's a good government must, recognize that. And that's what we're saying, that it's important that even the opposition in the country needs to also stand up. It's not criticizing for the sake of criticizing. It must hold government accountable to what is going on, So whatever issues that we have domestic, at the domestic front, the president and of course members of his cabinet must also face them head on. Inflation is at all-time high. And these inflations, we know the costs. And if there's anything the government needs to do to be able to stem the tide on inflation, we need investment in education massively. We need investment in infrastructure. Infrastructure is not just, developing Abuja alone. It's also connecting areas that needs to be connected.
The 1 year of President Tinubu is one in which he has stepped out to represent Nigeria. We have not had any major scandal in our foreign policy in terms of missteps. If you do away with what I said about Niger, so far I would say so good, but it is qualified goodness. We have traditional partners, none of them has turned their back on Nigeria. But your attractiveness as a nation that will also bring benefits to you will depend on what you are doing internally. All right? If at home you bring progress, at home you unite your people and they are happy with what you are doing, you don't have to fight too many battles on different fronts, then the outside world will take note. And that's what then will bring the other benefits, as in your productivity. What is the shape of your economy? What is the structure of your economy? And what goods are you producing? What does the outside world demand? Are you in a position to supply those goods in demand? But if you are not, then nobody will, it's like being in a marketplace. You have wares that you are selling. Unless your wares are useful and attractive, buyers will not come to you. I use this analogy because running a country is very much like being in a marketplace where you have products and you want people to come and buy from you. And it's not just an ordinary market. It is one in which there is competition. It is one in which others are looking at what you are doing. Either they want to copy or they want to outdo you in whatever you are producing. And therefore, you must keep quality at the back of your mind. You must keep value at the back of your mind. So our engagement with our traditional partners, I will say, I've not seen a major shift, but I've also not seen any gain that wasn't there before.
As President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's government enters its second year in office, the implementation of Nigeria's foreign policy is expected to influence Nigeria's global position and contribute to peace, security, development in Africa and beyond. Punaraman Benjamin, Arise News.